When you first launched, what were the biggest misconceptions that you had about private medical practice?
I think this is going back over 10 years ago now, but in private practice, I think there were two misconceptions. What I call one of them, the first one, the field of dreams philosophy, which is build it and they will come. And so you just think, well, because I'm amazing, people are just going to turn up because they know I exist. And you realize that doesn't happen because, as one of my marketing gurus told me, it's attention before intention. And you've got to build attention. People need to know you're actually out there. They don't just know you're there automatically. So having a strategy for that without just thinking, well, because I'm brilliant, people are just going to start turning up to see me. That's not going to happen. So you've got to have a strategy. And I didn't have one initially when I started. And one of the other big misconceptions was that private healthcare is automatically better. And I went and worked in private hospitals assuming they will have better facilities, they have a large marketing pool, they'll pull in patients for me, but also the standard of care I can deliver there will be higher than I'm used to in the NHS, for instance. And you realize quite quickly, actually, that's not the case because they are far more price sensitive than any of us NHS doctors are usually used to. They want to buy the cheapest things for the most bargain basement price they can usually get away with. And so you actually realize that, the facility, the stock, and you also realize there's no resilience because if something's not there, it's not there. They can't go and borrow it from the other 25 theatres, which the NHS has next door to you. It ain't there. They haven't got it. They ain't going to get it. So you start to then think, okay, I've got to plan a bit more. They've got no resilience. If we drop something, we're in trouble, potentially, if you've only got one kit. So it's those kind of misconceptions, I think, that, and what I also then realize is we all know this in private healthcare, but it's sort of the elephant in the room. It's the lazy man's approach is just go and sit in a private hospital and earn money from the hospital. It's a good approach for some people. If you only want a sort of certain amount of control of your practice and you only want a certain slice of the cake, and you're happy with what they provide you, then it's good because they provide that comfort blanket for you. But in reality, they take 90% of the patient's fee. As a surgeon or as a practitioner, you end up with 10% or 20% if you're lucky. They make you feel lucky if you end up with 20% of the fee. The lion's share is taken by them. Whereas if you can actually go through the effort of setting up your own practice, which is a lot more headache, I completely agree. You're trying to run your own business now, and to get CQC registration and maintain that and build your own team, it's quite painful. But if you can get there, you can switch that metric entirely. Obviously, that 80% now comes to your practice. You're now paying a practitioner 20 or 30% to do something for your, or even if it's 50-50, but at least the practice keeps the lion's share and that comes into you and that allows you to grow and develop and think and innovate. Whereas you don't do really much innovating in the within a constrained private hospital environment.
So, what was the single biggest investment that paid off early in your private medical practice journey?
I mean, I think the single biggest investment is the team. So people, people make make everything work. There's a bit of a cliche, teamwork makes the dream work, but that it is the team. If you've got a bad team, you feel the pain. If you've got a good team, and I've got an excellent clinic manager, I've got an excellent that works with me. We're quite a small team, but we're the ones that try and build and ensure excellent care. My patients know my clinical team better than they know me. When they come to see me, that what I constantly get is Samantha's amazing. Janice is so helpful. You can tell because people can tell when people are genuine because anybody can be paid to care. When people actually care, that you can tell, right? And people can read that in someone's voice, body language. And my team care, right? They've been with me for years, Sam over 10 years, and they care about the patients. They actually want them to have a good experience. They want to make sure that we've looked after them. And they almost see it as a personal failure if something's gone wrong. And that the patients love. And I think that was one thing, and the other was just actually having a strategy. You may not always be able to deliver on the strategy, and I openly say to people, I'm not a finisher. I'm the ideas man. I make up the idea and go, this is the direction of travel. This is where we all need to be traveling. This is the visionary position we want to be in. Somebody else actually has to put the nuts and bolts in and make sure that all the seats are screwed down and everything works. Because I'm not going to look at the the apostrophes and the full stops and make sure everything's ready. That's never really been my bag. I'm not admin strong. I find it boring just having to read back the copy I've written. I'm like, look, I've written it once. You guys read it. If you're happy with it, put it on. But then sometimes I find that, process is the issue, isn't it? 3 months later, I'll read it and go, why have they got all these mistakes in there? And I think, I should have just read it 3 months ago.
Yeah.
You live and learn, right? So the important view that I do have in life, I've failed in many businesses, is that it's not a failure. It's an opportunity to learn. Hopefully, as long as you learn and don't do it again, sometimes you will do it again. But if you learn and don't do it again, then it's a valuable life lesson, and there's no point carrying that baggage with you and sort of use it as a weapon, use it as armor, and move on.
How do you decide which roles in your private medical practice to keep in-house versus outsourcing?
I think for me, the roles that are patient facing, we tend to not want to. So, and that's difficult, right? Because I mean, we've used and currently use a VA, a virtual assistant, because if you're getting a lot of leads, especially from things like Meta, you know that 80-90% of them are going to be junk, is the honest answer. And so you think, I don't want to put my team on, 20 hours of calls a week when they've got better things to do. So we tend to outsource those sort of what we call lower qualified leads to a VA. And as long as a VA, we interview them, we know their language skills are good and they've been trained appropriately, you're going to invest a bit of time in training. They can perform well, but I think, sort of critical patient facing roles, bookings, dealing with the patient afterwards. We always do a customer call straight after a treatment, for instance, the next day, checking on them. That has to be somebody who knows what they're doing, is linked to you, for instance, can access your diary, knows where you are. So I think that bit's important. And I think people you ultimately rely on for decision making processes. So now, if I'm going to bring somebody into the team, I actually bring in 2 or 3 people with me from my team on the calls. I don't make those unilateral calls anymore because I've made a few mistakes, and you sometimes find actually the intuitive nature of the people, especially if they're going to be they work more closely with them than they do with me. So I think you've got to have that right balance. And now I don't think I've got it right a lot of the time, but I've got a core team who's very, very solid, and I think ultimately if you treat people well, they reciprocate, and I think I generally do. And so my core team is loyal. Loyalty is hugely undervalued now. As I said, one of them been with me over 2 years, the other over 10 years. And that shows a little bit of the sort of values they have and we have, that we've stayed together that long, because it's actually difficult to find. Well, that's what I find now. Workforce is really difficult. If you hire in-house in the UK, get reliability is actually really challenging. You invest a lot of time in training, and then 3-6 months later, something else comes along and they disappear. And I find the younger generation, I don't want to have a go at Gen Y and Gen Z, especially because you're probably in that generation looking at you. But yeah, I find them a little bit flaky. They're not that decisive, and they there's always grass is green on the other side approach for them. So it is a challenging work environment.
How did you handle the fear of leaving the safety net that is the NHS behind as you started your parapractice?
Well, it's a good question, but I haven't entirely left that safety net behind, because I still work in the NHS. And that's not actually because of the financial safety net. There is a financial safety net that people were reluctant to let go of. But in reality, if I left the NHS, my salary would go up multiples of what the NHS pays me. So it's not about money. For me personally, it's I've done traumatology for 20 years and sort of peaked in that area. And that's something that I find and I love and I enjoy. It was almost my first love in medicine. So you can't do that outside of the NHS in the UK. No one else has the resources or the patience to deal with complex trauma. So that's what I still do in the NHS. So I do complex trauma reconstruction in the NHS, and I do on call with the major trauma patients, and I still find that very rewarding and challenging. But outside the NHS, when you set up a business, I mean, it's some people, and that's the reason I mentioned earlier. People have a comfort blanket of the private hospital estate. They just go into Spire, Nuffield, HCA, and they sort of like, well, all they've done is just transplanted themselves from one building to another, and almost one employer to another. Because everyone else then looks after logistics and governance and your paperwork, and there are secretaries, and you don't have to worry about where you buy something from or anything like that. When you go into business yourself rather than just in private practice, so this is where you set up your own business, suddenly all that's your problem. And that is a very different level of lake or you're swimming in. It's much deeper. You can sink much quicker. The rewards are also more rewarding if you can get to the other side. But it's not for everybody, because it is challenging. And one thing I've found was people. Having partners can be challenging, having workforce you can't rely on, because everyone thinks business is fantastic because you get freedom. Anybody who owns a business realizes the business owns them. And if your staff don't turn up on your day off, you're now the staff. You have to go in and on a weekend or on your day off, and you suddenly end up having to, I've sat there answering phone calls in my own clinic before because the receptionist hasn't turned up. So I've had to go and I've moved there and sat with my laptop working from the clinic reception desk, because in case the phone goes, you don't want to miss customers, because now you're paying rent and the salaries are on your head, the rent's on your head, the rates are on your head, and that's why you sometimes sit there thinking maybe the guys in the private hospital got it right, earning 10% of the fee, and maybe that's the way. Well, maybe that is the way forward. And you do have moments where you challenge yourself and you think, ultimately, I think the autonomy I have is what I enjoy most. I can do what I want for my patients. We actually have treatments that we provide that we're one of the only clinics in the country providing. And if I tried to put that through a private hospital, I would have been challenged, and there would have been lots of and it's not even a safety thing. These are safe treatments we provide. They're well evidence based. There's lots of research on them, but they're novel for the UK. And I find constantly that people are trying to restrict what you can do, and it's because we're an NHS centric and private insurer centric market. And if the private insurers are not paying for something, or the NHS doesn't do it routinely, everyone starts to question, why are you doing it? And you think, well, actually, if you guys actually smell the coffee and go abroad, you'll see an awful lot of practices abroad that are very innovative, all safe, lots of data on them that we've almost completely ignored. I was slightly shocked when I first started going to international conferences and realizing there were things that people were discussing that I'd not even heard of in my 20-year medical career. I thought, how do I not know this? I've been to medical school. I've read all the textbooks. I've been in the NHS for 20 years, and this is the first time I'm even hearing about this. And initially, you have the slight, I'd call it NHS arrogance, where you think, well, if we don't know about it, then it must be rubbish. And then you listen to the evidence, and you listen carefully to the data. You see them presenting cases on 2,000 patients with positive outcomes, and you think, okay, maybe we're not in the right place, and they are. It's something that challenged my practice, challenged my thinking. It opened up my mind, and that's shaped my practice ever since. As long as something is safe, and there is evidence for it, and that I can defend at a conference or with my colleagues, and I can justify what we're doing. We're pushing boundaries and innovating and doing new things all the time, and that's something that I can do. Within 2-3 months of doing some research and governance and indemnity work in my own facility, where I wouldn't have been allowed to in a hospital.
I want to hear from your perspective. Like, what do you think makes a private consultant's brand strong in the eyes of a patient? Like, what is it specifically and tangibly? And how, because you obviously built it thinking, okay, this will be good, this will be good. Like, what are those things that you think will be good?
That's a good question. I'm not even sure I should be answering that, but maybe I should. The reason I'm saying it shouldn't be me is because I've been probably, with no arrogance, but just because I was the first to pioneer a few treatments and bring them into the UK, I was probably the most experienced regenerative medicine surgeon in the country, and probably still am now. And yet for 9 years of those 10 years, I've sort of largely been hid in the background thinking I'll build a brand. Everyone thinks, eventually I'll have a McDonald's or something. Who knows? McDonald's sells fast food, right? Everyone in the world does. But the name McDonald's doesn't sell fast food, does it? It's not. How the hell does that mean fast food? They're not called fast food for you. The name's not obvious. And I sort of had the same philosophy. I thought, look, I don't like social media. I don't want to be all over. Healthcare is a trust game. And I think patients have to trust you. And I felt me selling them healthcare or selling them myself, being a salesperson for my brand, wasn't the right approach. And I was completely wrong, because I did that and I hid behind a brand for years. And I saw many of my friends end up with 6- and 7-figure businesses because they put themselves out there. And I wasn't too bothered because I was doing lots of research and other work, and I was distracted and I had lots of distractions. My wife often calls me a busy fool, doing lots of research and charity work and conferences and education and teaching, none of which actually earns you anything. Usually, I may not be a busy fool, but I'm certainly a busy poor fool sometimes. And so I went through that cycle. And only last year, when my marketing really said to me, look, you are the dominant guy in this niche of medicine in the UK. We need you out there, because it will take us years and a huge budget which you don't have. I didn't have 10, 20, 30,000 pounds a month to spend on advertising with a PR agency, because I did approach one large agency which a friend of mine owns, and they thought they were doing me a favor by charging me 15,000 pounds a month, because they usually charge 30,000 pounds a month apparently to governments and other, they work with like Malaysian government and Singapore government. They're that sort of level of PR agency. And they were like, "Oh, yeah, we'll give you a half price discount because you're a friend. We'll do £15,000 a month." And I was like, okay, that's like 3 times what I earn in a month privately. So that isn't going to work. That isn't going to work. But thank you for the offer. And so I sort of went, I listened to my team and I put myself out there. And so now I've got a content growth manager who sort of, puts me out there. And that's certainly paid more dividends, so people engage, they know who you are. And I actually, social media is the social media, right? So yeah, you get lots of negative comments when you put yourself out there. I don't worry about those because to me, I never lie to patients. What we build is honest, data is honest. We tell people what our results are. And I manage patients' expectation generally really well because we've got thousands of our own patients' data we can present to them and say, these are the results we've had for the last 10 years. So that's quite an easy conversation, but I do find that that engagement has become well. And a lot of the people that I now speak to, I've had a phone call this morning, and people have said, "Oh, well, I watched you on, and I liked the way you presented this." And so they're actually, it's almost like they know you. You're pre-qualifying people, and they're like, "Well, he seems honest. He's saying the right things. He's not talking garbage. And if something is garbage, he's calling it out and calling it garbage." And I'm happy to do that. I try and stay professional on social media because at the end of the day, we are professionals, but there is an awful lot of health garbage out there, and one of my passions is to try and call that out and say when people are trying to sell people's nonsense. I mentioned a very, very high, one of the biggest Instagrammers in the world, 100 million followers, I think. I saw them on with a slightly dodgy regenerative medicine specialist telling everyone that they had an injection that morning and that evening, all of their pain had disappeared. And I was like, I don't even know how that doctor let you get away with that, because it's just garbage from start to finish. There isn't an injection unless you're giving someone local anesthetic, but that's not what they said they had. They thought they had some sort of posh stem cell. The stem cells do not work for you and disappear your pain that you've had for years. This person said they had pain for 3 years and it disappeared the pain in like 6 hours. No. It means that you don't even know what you've had or what it's supposed to be doing, or you're just lying. The honest answer. Unfortunately, we know there's lots of commercial relationships on social media that people get paid to say things and or get free treatments and so on. And it's something that I try and stay away from. Yes, we've got influencers who've helped us post and done things for us, but we don't provide free treatments for most people. And also, when I remember getting offered these influencers saying to me, we'll do a collab post and I said, how do you know it's going to work? We're about to do a treatment. What if it doesn't work? Are you going to do a collab post for me anyway saying, well, it was shit and it didn't work? I mean, that's not something I'm after. So actually, why don't we do the treatment? Why don't you trust me, and we actually get the result we want, and then we can talk about the result. I want to know what you're like in 3 months, not on the day you turn up in my clinic and you've not even had a treatment. What's the point of knowing that? So yeah, I mean, yeah. So I most influencers that approach me to get that vibe from me, I just say to them, I want a genuine testimonial, not a fake one.
Yeah, 100%. So I think what I'm interested in asking is about is like a lot of consultants ask me, should medical consultants market themselves personally under their name, or perhaps keep everything under a clinic or a practice name?
That's a good question. I think when you're first building, you may want to put it under your name because that's all you have. And I think if you want to scale in the future, you need a brand attached to that that's sometimes beyond your name, because how long do you want to work for? And do you want to treat every single patient in your clinic forever? And if something's built under your personal name, then that's unfortunately sort of what you're offering people, that I will see you, I will treat you. It's you that has the name, the reputation, the trust. And that was never my vision. My vision is to try and, treat, I like treating patients, but I don't want to treat 100 a week. So I'm happy treating 5 or 10 people a week. That's all, because that leaves me with brain space, innovation space, development space. I don't want any more clients than that. So if I get 30, 40, 50 patients a week, I've got fellows and people I've trained who have worked with us for years, and they work under our brand. And they're trained by me. People know them. Sometimes we do joint consultations, so they actually see me and the other guy or the other lady, and so that trust can be built together. So I built my current brand Kaizen with a I like the name. I've used it in teaching for many years. It means perpetual improvement. But beyond the name, I just thought that's just a description of your philosophy. But my plan always was I want a scalable business which doesn't completely tie me into it and means I have to see every patient, do every treatment. And you don't have to do that. There are lots of successful doctors who've got five surgeons working in their clinic, and the clinic's named after them. But you have to think that through and ensure that you've got a way of actioning that. So for me, I put my name into the building, but the brand isn't named after me. It's named after our philosophy.